you can't understand language itself unless you study all languages. And my thinking is that you can't understand writing unless you study all understandings and forms and methods and purposes of writing. So we cast a very broad net. We're also aware that the vast majority of those written forms, maybe 85, 90%, are to some degree threatened. And so our other purpose is not only to understand, but to support and advocate for these, what I call endangered alphabets, or if you like, minority writing systems. So what we're going to do today, and Pippa is going to lead us off in just a minute, is we're going to address a whole variety of issues that have to do with understanding writing in various forms, understanding how it is threatened, understanding how it might be revived, and really trying to change the perception of writing so that it's right there in people's faces. And we realize this is something that is understudied, under-researched, and we're trying to change that, along with our friends from Warsaw, who've been with us since the first World Endangered Writing Day. And we hope many of you will join us in one fashion or another, not just during the conference, but as our work continues afterwards. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to sidle off stage left, and I'm going to turn the events of the morning over to Pippa, who is going to tell you a little bit about how her personal life and journey and research and work has led to her involvement in this enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. What a great introduction to the day. We have lots in store for you. My topic is a personal journey through studying endangered, minoritized, and emergent scripts. I want to say a little bit about how I came to the study of these things, and also a little bit about what I think writing endangerment is and what we're doing here today. When I say endangered, I mean a script that is in some way threatened, that is in danger of loss. When I say minoritized, I mean a script that is not used by a majority, or that suffers the effects of being used by communities who also use or experience majority scripts. When I say emergent, for me, an emergent script means anything that has been relatively recently created. I'll come back to some issues of typology before I finish. But let's start with my personal journey. So I'm based at the University of Cambridge, where I currently run the VIEWS project, Visual Interactions in Early Writing Systems. When I finish speaking, I'll put some links in the chat for anyone who's interested in following up on anything I say. This is me with my son, Ben, who is a constant inspiration in everything I do. But I came to all this from studying the ancient world. So I've been trained as a classicist. Many years ago, when I was looking for a project to work on for my PhD, I settled on the island of Cyprus, which we think of as a Greek island, but it's a long way to the east of most other Greek-speaking islands and kind of the central area of Greek language use. And being so far to the east, being very close to the Levantine coastline, the Anatolian coastline, It's a very special island in lots of ways, very much has its own island identity. Now, the reason I started working on it is that at that point, not many people had worked on the languages of Cyprus. There was still quite a lot to say about them. And over the second and first millennia BCE, so that's the period that I've been mostly interested in, the island was home to a really distinctive writing tradition. And this is a writing tradition that existed for more than 1,000 years. So we get the earliest traces of it back in the 16th century BCE. And then it dies out towards the end of the first millennium BCE. So it's still being used in the 3rd century, and then after that sort of drifts away. As for languages, back in the Bronze Age, so in the 2nd millennium BCE, essentially, we don't understand the languages written in the inscriptions that survive from that period. So they remain undeciphered. But from around 1000 BCE, we have recognizable Greek starting to appear. And there are other languages spoken there too. So Phoenician, a relative of Hebrew and Aramaic and so on, was spoken there long term from at least the 9th century BCE onwards. And even later on, you seem to have one or more indigenous languages that we don't really understand very well, but remained in continuous use for a long time, and then disappeared around the time that the writing system disappeared. And this is a syllabic system. The idea from it for this particular system seems to have been borrowed from Crete and from mainland Greece, particularly from Cretan usage. So the Cretan Linear A script is probably the one that was kind of first borrowed and adapted. But in its Cypriot forms, this writing system, which we call Cypro-Minoan in the earlier period and the Cypriot syllabary later on, it's always been visually completely distinctive. It was changed and adapted for Cypriot usage. And that seems to have really set in motion a long-term association between this distinctive writing tradition and the Cypriot identity. Okay, now I've got some pictures here. So top left is one of the Bronze Age inscriptions, an early one that's actually written on clay. It's impressed into the clay, but when you just focus in on it like this, it almost looks like it's embossed. It's a bit weird. But that is done with clay impressions, a bit like cuneiform writing, but slightly different because the sign shapes are different, they're distinctive. And then later on, we have inscriptions on stone. People write on all sorts of different things. There was vibrant literacy throughout the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE in this script. In the bottom left, you can see an Egyptian monument where in between the hieroglyphs, someone has scratched a Cypriot graffito. Then as we get towards the 5th, 4th centuries BCE, Cyprus starts to become embroiled in different kinds of geopolitical wrangling. It gets caught up with what's happening in the rest of the Mediterranean, and things change. Things change politically, they change socially. At the end of the 4th century BCE, the Ptolemaic administration, so when the island was taken over by one of Alexander the Great's generals, essentially, that new administration imposed the use of the Greek alphabet for official inscriptions. When that happened, it went hand in hand with all sorts of shifts. So there was a political shift. socially, there seems to have been a shift in terms of what variety of Greek was being used, as well as what writing system you used. And into the 3rd century BCE, what we see is that official inscriptions use the Greek alphabet, and they use the Koine variety of Greek, which originates from elsewhere. But in religious inscriptions, you still see the local Cypriot dialect, and you see the local Cypriot writing tradition continuing in use for a while. So there's a shift there in usage. And as I was studying all of these things, what I came to realize is that I was working on a writing tradition that died out. Okay, now maybe that's not a rare thing for the ancient world. There are other writing traditions that died out. But around the time of the pandemic, I started a collaboration with Pippa Rickleton, a colleague, an artist and designer who came to me with an idea for a project. And his idea was that he would do a sort of alternative history where the Cypriot syllabic writing system had survived. It didn't die out around the end of the 1st millennium BCE. It survived through the medieval period, through to the modern day. And he kind of envisaged what it might look like now after that alternative history. So here is an open shop sign that he's written in a kind of adapted version of the script, because so you do today still see that there's an awareness of the Cypriot historical script, but it's not in use anymore, even though you will sometimes see it in sort of tourist settings and so on in Cyprus. But what Pico was envisaging was real continued usage. So he updated it with the changing dialect, for instance. And he kind of mocked up various images where you would see it as it might look in the wild today. And for me, that was a huge inspiration, because from working on a tradition that just died out, which I used to take as a simple historical fact, he opened my eyes to the idea that it wasn't inevitable that this script died out, that you could think of an alternative history. And by thinking about it like that, I got really interested in the reasons why not just language, but also a writing tradition can become endangered. And from there, I want to, in the kind of second half of this brief paper, I want to just talk about what we mean by writing endangerment, what I mean by writing endangerment. Endangerment, for me, I think, is always an issue of inequality. Endangerment is a term borrowed from biology, from species endangerment, from language endangerment, where the same kind of terminology has been used. But it's really important to remember that writing is not the same thing as language. What do I mean by that? Well, writing is a practice, and this is something that I've been working on for the ancient world, as well as thinking about it for the modern world. When I say a practice, I mean it's something you do. Writing is visible in a way that speech isn't, and it's not simply a transcription of speech. It's something that can be composed completely separately. Writing is embodied, whatever you're using for it, whether it's a pen, whether it's a brush, a reed, an implement that you scratch with, like a knife, whether you're using a keyboard or a phone, it's embodied in various ways that are different depending on the type of writing system. It is material, so it has a physical presence which affects what it looks like and where we see it. It can be artistic, it can be part of wider visual culture, so it interacts outside of simply language use, it interacts with many other areas of culture. You could say that writing can turn a space into a place, in the sense that it makes the place socially meaningful. So these are all reasons for researching writing as a separate phenomenon from language. And that means that it pays off to think about writing endangerment as something that could work differently, that we need to pay a different kind of attention to. And I've been looking sort of sideways at other areas of research, craft endangerment, music endangerment, for instance. I think there are lots of different directions we should be looking in when thinking about what makes a writing tradition endangered, and conversely, what we can do to support a writing tradition. And the last main point I want to make is about the typology of endangered systems. Now, I'm going to say that there are two kind of broad categories that I have in mind when trying to work through these issues. One is heritage scripts, ones that have a kind of long-term presence, are often created historically, and emergent scripts, that is to say, ones that have been created where we understand the circumstances of their creation to some extent in more recent years. Okay, they might be two broad categories that are useful for thinking with, but we can complexify those even more. So some traditions might be long ongoing ones that have been increasingly marginalized, and there is a struggle to keep it alive. Some historical traditions have already become extinct or nearly extinct, and it's a matter of trying to revive them. And just as with language revival, I think with script revival, there are some separate issues to think about, where the practice has kind of died out and needs to be brought back, but maybe also changed in some ways. And whether to change or not, I think, is a constant question in looking at minority scripts and their futures. There are many systems that have been excluded from traditional definitions of writing, which tend to prioritize the ways in which sound and speech are denoted. I'm very interested in trying to even the field there a little bit, and to approach writing from a more kind of inclusive perspective. Amongst emergent scripts, we also see different types. So you sometimes see the word neographies used to denote something that has been created more recently, but more recently might mean 100, 200 years ago. It might mean a new creation of the last 10, 20, 30 years, the last year. Scripts are being created as we speak. And one maybe difference, and the reason I sort of separated those two out, is that scripts being created more recently are facing different kinds of technological challenges, whereas ones that were created maybe 100 years ago or more, look at something like Cherokee, for instance, they face different kinds of problems in the way that, for instance, type has changed over time towards digitization. So there are different technical issues there. And we also see historical systems that are revived and kind of codified in new ways. So maybe they represent sounds or ideas in different ways to the way the original system worked. So actually, if you look closely, there's a whole lot of variety here. And one of the biggest points I want to make is that means that we should have diversity in mind when we think about writing endangerment. And just as scripts are diverse, so too are the needs of their users. And once I had started thinking about endangerment, of course, I looked online, and who did I find? Well, Tim, of course. And Tim has been single-handedly researching kind of global writing endangerment for quite a while now. It's more than 15 years now. And just seeing those efforts and thinking about how my experiences of writing endangerment in a completely different kind of setting might contribute to that inspired me to approach him for collaboration. And sure enough, we've been collaborating for a while now. I thought up creating a kind of network, the Endangered Writing Network, and in collaboration, those ideas have grown into two different directions. So the research network, which is what I've been kind of spearheading, and then the Script Keepers network, which you will hear lots more about today. So I won't say a great deal about it now. There's a whole panel devoted to it later on in the day, which I very much encourage you to listen to. But in thinking about the ways that we can research and also support minority scripts, there is a whole range of diverse needs that they may or may not have, that their users may or may not have. And I see our role as being open to supporting whatever is needed, not gatekeeping, not trying to control access, but really just trying to be open to what is needed. And that might mean revitalizing a script in association with a language. It might mean fostering or growing a community of users. It might mean creating materials for learning, for dissemination. It might mean creating a new script for a community, bolstering a sense of identity. It may mean trying to think about how to resist political or social oppression, how to use the script in an increasingly digital world, how to overcome all sorts of technical challenges. And those are the things that we are trying to support. So I have been involved in a few different things myself. Just a quick slide with a couple of things that I have done over the last couple of years. I'll put a link to assess your language's writing needs in the chat once I finished. And I've been involved in the policy brief and so on. I'm working on a research resource. So this is my current sort of version of what a logo for it might look like, but that is a work in progress about which there will be more news as time goes on. I'm also running a Discord server. I'll drop links to that in the chat all day so that people can join if they want to. That's somewhere for a community to grow of people who are interested in both researching and supporting minority scripts. And with that, I will say thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoy what we have in store for you for World Endangered Writing Day.